Well, joining me this morning to weigh in is Ted Thatcher, founder of Bright Lake Wealth Management. Ted, great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
I mean, it's always good to be with you.
Well, earnings season is well underway and all eyes are on Alphabet tomorrow after the bell. But what do you make of the volatility, not only in tech, but also in semis?
Yeah, so much of the market has been led this year by the broad earnings and certainly by the semiconductors, the chips, the memory names. And I think that there's a little bit of a natural, cyclical, pullback. In my opinion, it's a healthy one, actually. Investors love to see a rally, but then everybody gets a little nervous, and it is very normal, and it's okay for markets to pull back a little bit. There is some headwinds. A little bit of an AI cooling trade seems healthy to me. Obviously, there is some uncertainty still about, just the new Fed chair, Warsh getting his handle of things, the market getting used to that. Some of the second and tertiary consequences of the war in Iran kind of lingering on, petroleum products, even outside of, the spike in oil that we see, the supply constraints there too. And so the market has to digest that. Fundamentally, I'm very optimistic about the second half of 2026, but what I expect right now is continued volatility and chop, and I wouldn't be super surprised if there's a little bit of things perhaps got a little bit worse before, we really saw a pushback up.
Yeah, and Ted, as you mentioned, geopolitics do remain front and center. We continue to monitor the price of oil as well as the pain at the pump here. But one factor that I do want to bring up is IPOs. That is something that we've been paying attention to, especially with SpaceX and more listings coming down the pike here. So
Sure.
For Americans who are watching these market debuts, what is your perspective?
I think with IPOs, it's really important that investors remain disciplined. Obviously there was so much FOMO, excitement about SpaceX, and what has happened since, SpaceX, it spiked up and now it's down, I think, 120-ish a share or something like that. And so I think it's a good reminder, if we didn't want to think about what happened with Figma last year and those other things, that, hey, these IPOs don't just go straight up. I think we should have a little bit of cautiousness around Anthropic's potential release as well. That doesn't mean that these aren't, world-changing even technologies. They're exciting to be a part of. I think investors just want to be systematic. A nice approach, of course, would be like any kind of dollar cost averaging strategy. But if you're really wanting one specific name, a strategy I like a lot is a 30-40-30 approach. Pick a time frame, 3-6 months a year, and then come at it systematically. Start with 30%, halfway through that time frame, add 40, and then of course the final 30.
Yeah, and Ted, another perspective I'd like to get is on inflation as well as the Federal Reserve. So we are counting down to the July meeting, which takes place next week.
Yeah.
And while we don't expect any change from the central bank next week, there are a lot of considerations as we head into the end of this year as well as next year. So how should investors be looking at rates right now?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important questions investors can ask, because that phrase always comes to mind. Don't fight the Fed. Figure out what they're going to do and then get out of their way. And with Warsh, he came in a lot more hawkish than a lot of investors expected. Of course, to your point, we don't expect any changes. I don't actually believe, though, that Warsh will stay as hawkish as I think some fear. I was actually hopeful we might get a cut by the end of 2026, despite some of the belief and statistics saying that we wouldn't, just up until the most recent kinetic activity in Iran. We're now going on, I think, 10 days of strikes, and Brent's above 90. Depending on how long this lasts, it's going to hold that inflation number a little higher than I think investors would like, and that does make it really hard for Warsh to consider lowering. I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibility for them to lower this year, but right now it's not what I believe is going to happen, at least with the kinetic conflict that we see in Iran.
Well, Ted, we will have to leave it there for today, but always great having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Remy.